Hello, I'm Keith Spera from NOLA.com and the Times-Picayune. Welcome to Let's Talk. Name a genius who lived between the Middle Ages and the present, and my guest today probably wrote a book about him. He's penned best-selling biographies of Leonardo da Vinci, Benjamin Franklin, Albert Einstein, Steve Jobs, and most recently, Elon Musk. He's the former editor of Time magazine, the former chairman of CNN, and a professor at Tulane University, where he co-chairs the New Orleans Book Festival each March. He is Walter Issacson. Walter.
Hey, you left out the fact that I'm a former Times-Picayune reporter.
Well, you know, I can't hit all the details in your rather extensive biography.
That's the big one. Yes, right.
That is a big one. You and I would have been colleagues had I been working there at the time. So,
and it was a different century.
It was a different century. Do you credit the Times-Picayune with launching your career?
Well, absolutely. In fact, for better or worse, I had no intention of being a journalist. I had no intention of being a writer. I was just hanging around in New Orleans. In fact, I had worked with T. Smith and Son stevedores in the summer, which was a hot and grueling job, and I got an internship at the Times-Picayune, State's item at the time, and lo and behold, it's now many, many years later. I'm still wondering what I'm going to be when I grow up, but that's what set me on the course.
Working a sweaty summer as a stevedore, that convinced you that maybe you needed to do something?
We lived in an unair-conditioned apartment, my friend and I, who worked on Pleasant Street, which was misnamed at the time, and no air conditioning, and working on the derrick barges off the Napoleon Avenue Wharf.
And you thought, maybe I'll write books and articles.
Yeah, and it was right near this building where we're doing it. If you remember, that's where the Times-Picayune on Howard Avenue was.
That's right.
And it was air conditioned.
And you're like,
and had really good coffee, really good coffee in the cafeteria.
And here you are, all these years later. That set you on your path. All right, well, let's touch base real quick on the Elon Musk book, which came out in 2023. Did very well for you. You probably know more about Elon than anybody outside of his inner circle. You spent many, many hours with him.
I actually think I know more about Elon Musk than he knows about himself. He's not the most self-aware individual.
Well, yes, I think that's true. Knowing what you know about him, if he were to call you tomorrow and offer you a seat on one of his rockets, would you take it?
Well, no, I don't have a particular desire to be sent up into outer space. He wants, when I asked him, do you want to go to Mars? He said, well, I want to die on Mars, just not on impact. And I guess, I don't know, maybe orbiting the Earth. I hadn't really thought about that, but it's not something I'm waiting by the phone.
Before you accepted that ride, I guess you would have to take into consideration what he thought about the book. So if he liked it.
Exactly. Well, when I decided to go on the ride to write the book, he was only doing SpaceX and Tesla. I thought, man, this is a great, electric vehicle, sustainable energy, space travel. And then it became sort of a rocket ride, as you would put it, when he decides to buy Twitter and does so many other things. It was more of an interesting, complex, layered adventure than I expected it to be when I embarked on the book.
Well, and that's the thing about writing a book at this point in someone like Elon's life. I mean, there'll probably be room for 2 or 3 more volumes before it's all said and done. I mean, the guy does big things, and he does a lot of them, and he does them all the time. So that book, it didn't really have an ending.
He is such an important influence on our time, for better and for worse, whether you like him or don't like him. Bringing us into the era of electric vehicles, being the only entity that can get American astronauts from the U.S. into orbit, and of course even on social media, as well as Neuralink, where he's just implanted chips in the brain. So he's by far the most interesting person, and I figured if I spent enough time with him, I could crack the code and make him interesting, and then, there'd be more chapters later on, but you'd get to know who this person was.
Right. So you think you'll do a follow-up at some point?
No, I think there'll be somebody else. I'll pass the torch to somebody else to write a book in 10 years.
You've been on the rocket ride already. You don't need to go back on that particular one. The book's been out for a while now. What do you think was the most unfair criticism of it that you saw? What was something that you read about the book that you felt that reviewer didn't necessarily understand what you were doing or what the intent was?
Well, I'm a lucky person, and I felt most of the criticism, to some extent the criticism, to the extent there was criticism, was generally fair. There was nothing really bad. I think one criticism, which I'll cop a plea to, was I wasn't all that judgmental. I just told the story, and I let the reader make up the mind, his or her mind, on what do you really make of us? Do you have to be such a jerk? Do you have to be so tough? And by the way, how come he succeeded where others failed on certain things? And there people said, you should have come down on him like a ton of bricks. He does these bad things. And I say, hey, I'm old-fashioned. I was in the Picayune 30, 40 years ago. You just went out, you report the story, you try to get all the facts right, you make it a narrative, and then you let the reader decide, what do I make of this? So I guess the criticism that I don't think was unfair, but I'll say, yeah, it's true, is I let the reader make judgments instead of me preaching. I'm more of a storyteller than a preacher.
Well, and it's so fluid, and it can change. I mean, Elon could wake up the next day and do something terrible, or he could do something amazing. So, I mean, really, your role was to, as you said, report
I have
what you
a
saw.
particular advantage, a particular thing that happens, which is I get really up close to him. He decided he's going to let me spend 2 years, morning, noon, and night, any meeting, nothing off limits. And I'm lucky. I've written a few books before, so I can afford to fly off to Brownsville, Texas, and Boca Chica and Fremont and take a lot of time and spend it with him. So I didn't want to squander that opportunity I had to be the eyes and ears of the reader and say, what's it like to be right next to him? Why is he both so driven by demons but also driven by passions? I just wanted to get that out as a narrative story, and I didn't think I needed to insert too much of my own preaching into it.
No, and I think, and that's the question, that I sometimes run into as a journalist. You want to be, in certain instances, proximate to power, because you can give people a glimpse at something they might not otherwise see, and I think that's important. The criticism is the danger is that you get too close and you don't have it as an objective eye, but I think it is important to be that fly on the wall and just describe the scene.
Very few people do that these days, meaning actually go out and report and just try to get the narrative right and give it straight to the reader. And boy, if you read the book, there's a good, there's the bad, there's a really ugly. I don't sugarcoat it. I don't varnish it. Everything is exactly as I saw it. And yeah, I think nowadays journalists, I mean, you're a critic, so you're kind of paid to have opinions, but nowadays journalists sometimes lead with their opinions. They're more on cable shout shows than they are on the road taking notes in a notebook. And I think it's kind of good to have people who don't lead with their opinions. They just say, let me tell you the story, and they try to go out and report it.
Absolutely, absolutely. If you're just tuning in, my guest today is author Walter Issacson. Yeah, and I agree. I mean, one of my favorite stories I ever wrote was when I went to New York with Fats Domino after Katrina, when he went up there to promote a post-Katrina tribute album. And so I was the fly on the wall, riding with him, in the limo and going in the hotel room and just hanging out. And people got to see this glimpse of Fats. And I didn't have opinions about, what he did or why he did this or why he didn't do that. But it was just a really fascinating look at how it works behind the scenes. And for a character like Elon, and as you did with Steve Jobs prior, I think that's important for people to see how these individuals who are affecting our daily lives operate and live, and I think that's a valuable insight.
Yeah, I've done it, I guess, 4 times with a living person: Henry Kissinger, Steve Jobs, Jennifer Doudna, and then Elon Musk. And especially in the cases of Steve Jobs, Jennifer Doudna, and Elon Musk, I had something that I don't think ever since, Boswell got to spend day after day with Dr. Johnson, I had a particular thing that I could bring to the party, which is day after day. I'd be in Jennifer Doudna's lab. She's the woman who discovered gene editing technology called CRISPR. And I'd be by her in the lab and using pipettes and learning how to edit genes with her. And so I could put that into the book. Likewise, I lived at Steve Jobs' guest house for, off and on for months. So I got to say, here's what it's like when he goes into the design studio with Johnny Ive and tries to figure out what the iPhone is going to look like. And the same with Elon Musk, being at midnight on a Friday in Boca Chica, Texas, in the launch pad as he gets really angry and orders a surge of people to stack the rocket. So I don't bring a great deal of opinions to the party, but I do have the opportunity to be really, really on the scene. And I learned that my first day at the job of the Times-Picayune when Billy Rainey was the city editor. And he'd say, just tell me the story, just get me the facts.
Amen. When you spend that much time with somebody, you obviously end up with an incredible amount of material. So as a writer, I mean, what is your methodology for working through that? Because I assume you're taking notes all the time, you're recording a lot of stuff, so it just must be an incredible volume of material. How do you start the process of wading through all that
Well, one simple secret, which is not mine, I think you see it in the Bible or anywhere else, is keep it chronological. I mean, the Bible has the best lead sentence ever, in the beginning, comma. And so the other thing that flows from that is be a storyteller. Whenever I'm trying to organize something, I say, let me tell you a story. So if I'm going to talk about why Elon Musk can get into such a dark mood and fire 85% of the people at Twitter, or do something amazing like get rockets into orbit, docking with the space station, and then put up satellites to recreate the internet, instead of trying to analyze the whole thing, I say, all right, in each paragraph, almost, I'm going to start in my mind with the phrase, let me tell you a story. So I just put the stories that I've seen in chronological order, and it makes the book a narrative, a storytelling. Now, we're from New Orleans. What do you learn to, you learn to do that all the time. If you're out at dinner with friends, me and Michael Lewis talk about it a lot because we were at Newman together, he's a little bit younger. But you're trained that even at the lunch table, you have to say, let me tell you a story.
And you do in the book. Do you obviously have somebody transcribe all your interviews? I mean, you're not doing that kind of grunt work, huh?
Especially with the Elon Musk interviews, I couldn't really trust anybody else to transcribe them. Some of them were, you'll read it in the book, but there's all sorts of information in there that I thought would be dangerous if we're floating around. I also think that if I do my own legwork, do my own research, and even do my own transcribing, then I'm much more up close and personal with the story.
So you transcribe all your interviews yourself?
My wife, Kathy, I sometimes say, I sometimes, hey, Kathy, can you help me with this one?
Do you have more hours in the day than a normal person? Because that seems crazy.
No, I don't.
I know how long it takes. I do my own interviews, obviously, but it's time consuming. It's a hard process.
What I've tried to do is do Rev.com and some of these other and they can get it 80% right, which actually gets you a little bit far along, but then you still have to listen to it, especially if it's Jennifer Doudna in the lab trying to edit a strand of DNA, or even if it's Elon trying to figure out whether you're going to use certain machine learnings for full self-driving technologies and unprotected left turns. The auto transcribers don't quite do it right. As for more hours in the day, there's certain things I just don't do that much of. I don't watch TV that much, which is why I was never very good at running CNN. But I don't.
Like that would have come in handy, yeah.
And I love music, as you know. You've seen me at many music things here, and I like sports some. But we don't spend a lot of time going out to movies or watching TV, and maybe it just gives you a little bit more time. And another thing is, people say, how do you find time to, I say, how do you find time to play golf? Or how do you find, if you love something, it's easy to find time. And I love storytelling, and I love reporting.
Do you, are you kind of a first draft guy, or do you revise what you write? Does it come out clean initially, or do you revise?
Well, early on, I was an adopter of computers, because the notion of being able to cut and paste and revise rather than have to retype pages. So even back at the Times-Picayune, even at Time Magazine, I was one of the first users of computers, because I have to revise and revise and revise. And I finally learned a trick that came from Leonardo da Vinci. Take even the Mona Lisa, the greatest of paintings, but instead of trying to do it straight all at once, it was layer after layer, brushstroke after revision after revision. So one of my secrets is I just write a very rough chapter, and then I'll revise it. Then I'll revise it. And I think after 15 revisions, I'll read it out loud and say, okay, maybe just a few more brushstrokes.
It's getting there.
Yeah,
I can see you getting there. You see you getting there. If you're just tuning in, my guest today is author Walter Issacson. You write a lot of books, obviously, and so it's apropos that you are the co-chair of the New Orleans Book Festival, you and Cheryl Landrew. This thing is only 3 years old as we speak, and it got off to a fast start. I mean, right from the get-go, you were, I suspect, going to your own Rolodex, because you had people like John Grisham early on and Bill Gates early on. I think you interviewed Bill Gates at the festival. So what was the goal with the book festival? What's the goal of it?
Well, Cheryl Landrew, when she was First Lady of the city, did a children's book festival out in City Park. And I think she kind of missed it, and I said, well, we could kick it up a notch. I had come from the Aspen Institute, where when I was there, we created Aspen Ideas Festival, which was just a great success. People were hungry to get together and discuss ideas. And New Orleans is a city of festivals, and you and I hang around Jazz Fest a lot, but probably Food and Wine Fest and even French Quarter Fest. Well, we're a great literary city, but we didn't have we did have the Tennessee Williams Festival, the Faulkner thing, but we didn't have just a huge book festival. When I write books, I go on the circuit. I go to the Miami Book Festival, the Texas Book Festival, you name it, Chicago Humanities Festival. So why don't we have one? So the goal was to bring people together. And then in the era of COVID, people were hungry to get back together in person. And so, between Mardi Gras and Jazz Fest, we said, okay, here's an opening in the cultural calendar of New Orleans for a festival. We want to make it free. We want to make it open to the public. We don't want to make it elitist. We want to make it so from every community and every neighborhood and every zip code in this city and every school, people can come. We have people who are patrons and, will pay a little bit of extra money to get a particular reserved seat. But otherwise, you don't have to get tickets. You just show up. And we have big tents and big music and big food and big authors.
Well, yeah, I think this year, the dates this year are March 14th to 16th, I believe. And yeah, the lineup, I mean, it's Ken Burns, David Brooks, Liz Cheney, Doug Brinkley, Donna Brazile, a lot of people with B's in their surnames.
Yeah, you're just at the beginning of the alphabet, yeah.
But Richard Ford, there's an F.
Yeah.
So you've got all these writers, but then you also have folks like Big Frida and Irma Thomas.
Irma Thomas, I was just talking to Cheryl right before I came in here, is going to close on Saturday with Irma Thomas. She said, you think that's a good idea? I said, man, when I was really young, before you were around, and went to the first jazz festivals, and I knew the people who, Quint Davis and others who were starting it up.
Yep.
And I remember, maybe you can check it out, first or second time, and it was both at Armstrong, what we now call Armstrong Park, and Irma Thomas doing the finale. She always sang It's Raining. I said, man, that's going to bring us back to our roots to have Irma Thomas. We want to make it a book festival, so 80% of what happens at it are about books. But we also want to make it a New Orleans festival, so there's always a big crawfish boil, and there's always a lot of music. Ben Jaffe and the Preservation Hall Jazz Band always plays. Dr. Michael White plays, and now Big Frida, but in particular for those of us of a certain generation, Irma Thomas.
Irma's patron saint of New Orleans at this point. I mean, and her voice is so beautiful still. I mean,
and she also is not just a great musician and singer, but she gets New Orleans. I've seen her at the Greater New Orleans Foundation. And so she'll talk from her heart about New Orleans. And by the way, yesterday, we're taping this on a little bit before it's airing, I went to see Branford Marsalis announce that he's going to come down to the Ellis Marsalis Center. So music brings us back together.
Absolutely, absolutely. And what is the catchphrase for the book festival? Is it Mardi Gras for the mind? Is that what?
Yeah, I think so. Although I think we could also say, Jazz Fest for the mind, because we've got many tents. One of the models was Jazz Fest, and also Aspen Ideas Fest, because at any given moment, it's 4 or 5 venues going on.
Right.
McAllister Auditorium, the Student Center, a big tent on campus, the ROTC building. So you might have, we have General David Petraeus and Admiral Mike Mullen. We have a lot of speakers about American foreign policy and military. But if that's not your cup of tea, you can go somewhere and watch Michael Lewis do Amor Tolls or something in a different venue. So the biggest problem we have is we schedule all these things, but it's like when you and I go to Jazz Fest, you look at the schedule and say, oh my gosh, I'm going to miss Galactic, but something's here.
Are you selling crawfish Monica? Are you going that far into the Jazz Fest?
No, but that's a good idea. I think we're just doing boiled crawfish.
Got to get crawfish Monica, maybe put some hay out just to get the feel on a wet day out there. You're a professor at Tulane, and the title is you're the professor of American history and values. What does that actually translate to in the classroom? What do you talk about with your students?
I do 2 classes that I particularly like. One this semester is called The Digital Revolution. And the subtitle is From Ada to Zuckerberg, meaning it starts with Ada Lovelace in the 1830s coming up with the concept of a general purpose computer, and generally ended with Mark Zuckerberg doing social media. But I flipped the script a bit too. For the last 2 or 3 weeks of class, I make the students teach about things since Facebook, like what do you make of TikTok, how do you compare it to WeChat, etc. But especially now, this year, we're doing artificial intelligence, the new chat bots, and how they change everything. So to me, connecting technology to our values is one of the most important things we're going to have to do in this century. I wrote about it with gene editing in the Code Breaker book about Jennifer Doudna. When we learn to gene edit, how are we going to process that morally? Likewise, you see the Oppenheimer film or read it. In my Einstein book, the atom bomb, how do we process it? Social media, we didn't process very well. We unleashed Facebooks and Twitters on the world without figuring out how do they connect to our values. AI, we're going to have the same problem. So that's what I try to teach.
And those are important conversations. I'm the father of a 16-year-old and a 14-year-old and an 11-year-old. So yes, seeing how they interact with social media, you've got to have some values attached to that and some restraints, because otherwise it could lead to some very
Well, it could lead to some very dark things for a teenager, but also for a democracy
Society.
that's 250 years old.
Exactly, right. It's a macro and a micro challenge.
Correct.
You got to look at them both. So, is that something you enjoy, interacting with those kids, though?
Oh, yeah. It's a recharging of the batteries, but I fear, and I probably shouldn't say this publicly, I learn more from them than they learn from me.
Yeah.
And so and it's been 5, 6, 7 years I've been doing it, and now wherever I go, I'll be anywhere, Los Angeles, St. Louis, and people come up and say, I was in your class, and it's just great, because at a certain stage in life, you say, what can I do to pay it forward? To me, it meant moving back to New Orleans, because this community totally shaped me, and whatever I can do here is helpful, but also teaching at a place like Tulane, which is just an absolutely awesome institution.
We've only got a couple minutes left here. I want to mention last year, 2023, you received the National Humanities Medal from President Biden. Obviously you've done a lot in your career, accomplished a lot of things, but when he was pinning that medal around your neck, did you get a little, queasy feeling,
I did, and I actually misstepped a bit. I was supposed to then go off this way, and I was like so flummoxed. My wife, my brother, his wife were there in the White House, and I sort of went off the wrong direction. But I did think, it's important to understand how the humanities connect to our sciences and to our technologies. And in this day and age where we have so much new technology, the importance, and this is what BookFest is about too, of connecting the humanities, the arts, culture, to technology, to engineering, to science. That's what you get to learn on a great campus like Tulane, which is why I like being there. But that's what we have to do to make sure we're taking ourselves into the 21st century with a human understanding of our new tools and technologies.
And that's going to define the future, quite frankly. I mean, that's the discussions that are going to
Well, and you got to talk to your 3 kids to make sure that they get it right.
Absolutely, absolutely. Real quick, last thing, do you have your next book project lined up or not?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of things. I haven't signed up or anything. I'm thinking at some point, I tried to do a book on Louis Armstrong. I don't know if you know that. And I grew up pretty much in the neighborhood, not too far from here, or Perdido Street, where he was. And I went and studied everything about him. I went to Corona, Queens, listened to all the tapes, and I knew everything about Louis Armstrong except for who he was. I couldn't figure out whether he was happy, why he was waving the white handkerchief with the smile, what was behind the mask and the smile, did he like white people, what was the deal? And I've put that aside. Someday, whether it's going to be with Wynton Marsalis or somebody else, I'm going to say, okay, work with me. Together we'll do such a book. I'm probably going to also do Marie Curie, because I think that the combination of physics and chemistry at the beginning of the 20th century sets us on a road, and she was also a great woman pioneer. Also means I go to Paris.
And she is not around to criticize you. So
right, every now and then after I write about a living person, it's like, you know, my wife and I say, okay, it's time to go into the Wayback Machine and do somebody who's been gone for 100 years.
Well, all right. Well, I look forward to reading that book one day. Walter Issacson, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for joining me.
Keith Spera, thanks for all you do.
All right. Once again, I'm Keith Spera. This has been Let's Talk. We'll talk again next week.